Well, let's get started, everyone, while people are zooming in. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Lauren Kuby with ASU's Stardust Center for Affordable Homes and the Family. And Stardust seeks to connect the dots among housing, health, food access, and transportation, all of those social determinants of health, even shade, to help craft regional integrated solutions leading to happy and healthy communities. So it's my honor to introduce our moderator, Meagan Ehlenz. She is someone who's very much involved in the housing space and research at Arizona State University. She's going to moderate the discussion. And she's a senior global futures scholar at the Julie M. Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory. She's also an associate professor and associate director of planning within the School for Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning. Her major fields of study include urban revitalization and community development, which is why she's such a perfect moderator for today's discussion. Meagan, take it away.
Thanks so much, Lauren. So I am delighted to be here with all of you, and in particular, I'm delighted to welcome our speaker today, Matt Enstice, and he's the author of the New Island Press book, featured here. It's through Island Press. It's called City Forward: How Innovation Districts Can Embrace Risk and Strengthen Community. So Matt is the president and CEO of the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus in Buffalo, New York, where he leads a pioneering initiative to integrate innovation, healthcare services, life sciences, clean energy, health and well-being, entrepreneurship, and education. Lots of stuff, all in an effort to revitalize the city of Buffalo and the Buffalo Niagara region. Matt has led this nonprofit since its formation in 2002. And so just a quick reminder before I hand this over to Matt, please enter your questions into the Q&A feature at any time. After Matt finishes his presentation, I'll be moderating that process. Lauren will send the questions to me and we'll get through as many as we can. Matt, take it away. Matt, I think you're muted.
There we go. I think I'm good now.
You are.
So thank you very much for the intro and having me here today. Really excited for it, the conversation, and I really look forward to any questions or comments that people have as I present this. I really like presenting in front of people. Doing it on the screen is a lot more difficult, but I'll take questions and hopefully can make this as interactive as possible. I'm actually here in Toronto right now at the Association of University Research Parks, where innovation is a major buzz. Kyrie Stevens on our team is talking at a panel on access and inclusiveness in the space. And it's been a great conference, and being headed actually out of our good friends from Arizona who are all the way here in Toronto with us. So thank you for having me here. I'm going to go through, give you a quick introduction of myself, a quick overview of the medical campus and what we're doing, and then just some stories from the book and kind of free flow it. So just like myself, I might be all over the place, and really would appreciate any comments and questions as you're doing this. So my name is Matt Enstice. I grew up in Buffalo, New York. From there, after I went to college, I moved on to Los Angeles and New York City, where I entered the entertainment world, where I worked on movies out in Los Angeles. And then I worked at Saturday Night Live in New York City for a while. And then my wife and I decided that we were going to move home to Buffalo, raise our family there. And that's when the whole medical campus kind of got going. And I'm going to try to figure this thing. There we go. So we got the medical campus moving and started. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story. And I guess the other component part of me right now, my wife and I, is we're empty nesters. We have a senior, our daughter Molly is a senior at Nazareth College and Rochester, New York. She's a musical theater major. And then our son Tommy just became a freshman this year. And so my wife and I, she's actually getting to learn who I am maybe a little bit more, remembering who I was as a person. So it's been a lot of fun. And here we go. So what is the medical campus? We have 4 core components of what we work on. As a lot of places similar to ours, we don't deliver healthcare or do research or do teaching. That's what our great institutions do. And so our focus is on the placemaking and making the district a great place, the transportation side of everything, and making sure that's, flowing as smooth as possible and being as innovative as possible within all that. The innovation community, the core focus, we've been doing this for many, many years now, of bringing people together, helping them innovate. But the real focus we've had a lot lately is making sure that it's accessible to all, because that's one of the core things is everybody is an entrepreneur one way or the other. It's how they want to jump in and feel that they can be a part of it. And then the last part is our health and well-being side of what we're doing, which is really become even more important during the pandemic, addressing mental health and well-being of people. As you're building innovation communities, it's super critical that people feel not just that we can talk about physically being in shape, but mentally being in shape is when people are at their best. So our medical campus, 120 acres. When we started it, we were at about 100 acres. We expanded just a little bit to the south of our campus and grew that. Today we're at 9 million square feet. When we started this 20 years ago, we were at 4.5 million square feet of space. It's been roughly $1.5 billion worth of investment, 150 companies located on the campus. A thing that is important as you think about innovation districts, it's not about all the stuff that happens on your campus. It's really about, what's the impact, positive impact that you're having with the community. And that slide right there, in the last 10 years, 30% of all permits have been within a 1 mile radius. And what we started to see is restaurants and residential. And obviously the pandemic's changed that a bit, but we're starting to see it come back. But at the core, by having the right infrastructure and ecosystem in place and building the innovation district, it allowed for this other stuff to happen. Our vision, right here, you can read it, but it's at the core of it. We're trying to help not just make the campus, but make the city a vibrant place where innovation and everybody feels like they can be a part of it within those topics that I talked about before. Here's our mission. I'm hoping that we can share these slides, and I have no problem sharing these slides with anybody. But this is our boardroom that you're looking at right here. And we really believe in this. And we have a group that I meet with on a regular basis, and I'll talk a bit about that in the slides, called Better Together. And that's at the core of what that slide is about. So the book. Hopefully some of you have read it. If you haven't read it, I would love it if you could buy a copy, read it, give me your thoughts and input on it. We at the BNMC love to learn. So we're always taking feedback on, here's our view of it. Are there other things we need to be learning? So what I'm going to do is, as I said, free flow some of these stories as though we were in a room and doing a little book tour here and kind of talking about it. Don't worry, I'm not going to read to you. Let me just try one more thing here. Sorry. Okay. So what this slide is my unscientific representation of the city of Buffalo, of how I feel about it. And I'm a passionate Buffalonian. It's not because the Bills are doing great right now. It's that I think Buffalo truly is a great place where a lot of people care about each other and are supportive of each other. When you leave Buffalo, people and you're somewhere else wearing a Buffalo hat or a shirt or a t-shirt, whatever it is, people support you and they get into long conversations with you, and it's great. And so what this is I believe Buffalo right now is a great place to live for 10% of the population. It's good to very good for another 30 to 40% of the population. And for the rest of the population, it's tough. They're struggling. And one of the things that started to hit us, especially myself, and how we really got into some of these journeys and the stories around this was I started walking through our buildings, and what I saw were people that looked like me, 20 years younger, and just a little bit more hair. And I started to say, why is that? Because when I go to other parts of the country, I wasn't seeing that. And I said, we've got to start to think about, how do we look at this different, and how can we potentially make positive change here? So let's see if my stories are okay. Good luck, it'll never happen. This was one of the first meetings that, and part of the book was to say that, or the whole book concept was what worked, what didn't work. And as I thought back to when we first started building our medical campus, it was myself, the leaders of the institutions, and most importantly, a gentleman by the name of Tom Beecher, who was a volunteer chair of the board. And I've had some great volunteers engage with all of this. But the whole concept was, how do we work together to build a great place for the community? And how do we leverage the assets? At that time, the anchor institution theory was the big theory of all of this. And as we've learned over the years, one of the big things I started to think about was, okay, it was about anchor institutions, but should we be thinking differently? Is there another way to look at this, and what should we be thinking about? And that's kind of what we've done and where we are today. So I'm going to walk you through this journey. Good luck, it'll never happen. 20 years ago, Tom Beecher and I went and met with the business. It was the head of the Chamber of Commerce in Buffalo. And we sat down with them and said, look, the mayor of Buffalo had this vision to build a medical campus because we had all the assets in place, our Cancer Institute, our university, our hospital systems. They were all in one area together, our great Nobel Laureates Research Institute. And we said, if we start packaging this, we can do things better together as a community. And we went to this business leader and said, look, this is what we're thinking about doing. He said, good luck. This is never going to happen. It's Buffalo. And it was that negativity and that drive that really changed us. But more importantly, this next slide was something that we learned along the way. And what it was you really have to listen to people. And this slide right here, what do the neighborhoods have to do with this? Really important early on story in the evolution of the medical campus. We had all the CEOs and chairs of our institutions together, and they had always been doing their own thing and driving a lot of stuff. And we had brought in two designers. One, it was called Chan Krieger and Associates. It was headed by a gentleman by the name of Alex Krieger, and his partner was a guy named David Gamble. And these two individuals came through, helped us build out our master plan and implementation strategy. But more importantly, their specialty was, how do you take economic development and blend it with community development? And at this moment, we started to tell our institutions, we really think it's a good idea that you put our surrounding neighborhoods on the board of directors. And this quote here was from one of the leaders that said, look, the neighborhoods don't know anything about building a medical campus. Whatever we do, they're going to like. And one of the other board members turned to him and said, in all due respect, look around this table. None of us have any idea, because none of us live in this neighborhood. Maybe we really should try something different, have the neighborhoods at the table and start to move things forward collectively, and let's see what will happen. And that thought process won out. And I will say it was one of the greatest decisions as a collective body that we ever made. And this part right here of listening to all the voices, it really ties into this lady right here, Jan Peters. Jan was running the local housing development in the adjacent low-income neighborhood. And what Jan ended up doing was she joined our board. She was the first representative. And at one of our very first meetings, one of the most successful business people in Buffalo was at the table, because he was the chair of the board of one of the institutions. And he said, the neighbors will, similar comment to before, that the neighborhood will just like what we're doing, and this is how it should go in the neighborhood. And Jan looked up and said, you know, in all due respect, I've never had one conversation with you before. I don't even know who you are. And I can tell you right now, you are 100% wrong within how the neighborhood looks at things. And it was so impactful because it was early. It was allowing for a voice that might not have had a voice before to be at the table. And I can tell you, it made us better as to who we are as the medical campus, but more importantly, it started to change the dialogue around our community of starting to build inclusiveness. And inclusiveness and diversity, equity, inclusion, they're all buzzwords. I'm going to use them, and I don't mean them to be the cliche kind of that I feel like they are right now. But the part of our story here is, I can't tell you today that we figured it out 100%. And I can't tell you that we solved it overnight. What we do know, it's a journey. And that was a big part of all this. This was another one of the stories, Mr. and Mrs. Mackey. You know, I think about them often. They were houses, they owned houses just adjacent to the campus where it was, and the good part about this was the community and the campus got together and said, here's a few locations where we could build something, a new major development. It was assisted living home that one of the institutions wanted to build. And we had multiple sites, including one on the campus, this one just adjacent to the campus, and just other sites we were looking at. But the Mackeys lived on the one just adjacent to it. And I remember the institutions coming to me and saying, hey, do you think you can go to the 5 landowners and offer them $20,000, see if they'll take it to move out? And I just remember talking to them and saying, look, you can't do anything with $20,000. So let's think about this differently. And we went through this whole process, and I went in people's homes, sat down and talked with them, worked with them, helped them find what their next option could be. But more importantly, made sure that they were taken care of financially, that it wasn't a win-lose situation. It really was, it had to be, if it was going to be a win-lose situation, we had to lose in the scenario from a financial standpoint. We had to win from building what was in the best interest for the community. So financially, everybody was taken care of, but Mr. Mackey really stuck out to me. So the neighborhood was mainly African-American neighborhood for probably the last 50, 60 years. And Mr. and Mrs. Mackey lived there. Mr. Mackey was African-American. Mrs. Mackey was white, Italian lady. She's really funny, zero fear of telling me what she really thought about me and everybody else in the city of Buffalo. But I went to Mr. Mackey. What we had offered him, we got down to many, many meetings, and I gave him this offer that included healthcare for life. And he looked at me and he said, you know, Matt, I really enjoy living in this house, coming outside every day. So really, no matter what you give me, and I'd given him a lot of money, healthcare for life, you name it, it was all on the table. And I left and I said, I can't believe we're not going to get this deal done with what we just put on the table. But, you know, if this is what he wants to do, I support it. And so I called him up. I can't remember if it was the next day or a day later. And I said, Mr. Mackey, you know, it's been great to get to know you. You know, I really respected it, you know, appreciated our conversations, respected you taking a serious look at this. And I said, I just have to ask you one other thing. Mr. Mackey, would you do this as a favor to me to get this deal done? He looked at me and he goes, okay, you got a deal. And it was one of those things that I never really asked him or made him feel like, and I thought we had all these great conversations, but made him feel that he was in charge and he was the driver and he was doing something really important. And it was a really interesting moment for me that it actually wasn't about the money. It wasn't about healthcare for life. It was that he wanted even more respect than I actually thought I was giving him at the time. And I'll always remember that one. Table of Trust. This is another amazing moment in, I'd say, the journey that I've had over the last 20 years. Pastor William Gillison, unfortunately, he passed away about 2 months ago. And I got to know Pastor Gillison about 6 years ago. He called another pastor and told him that I was a bad person. And I said, honestly, I don't even know who Pastor Gillison is, but if you'd like to talk, I'm more than happy to get in a room and meet with him. And so I sat down with Pastor Gillison, and I walked into a room. It was him and two other pastors. I walked in, introduced myself. Pastor Gillison was just sitting there. The two other pastors just unleashed on me, and they started yelling at me, and I didn't even know what they were talking about. And I let them speak, and I asked them, I said, are you done? And then they said yes. And I explained why what they were saying wasn't the entire story. And I started to explain it. And Pastor Gillison looked up at me and he said, Mr. Enstice, we owe you an apology. You're not a bad person. And I said, well, thank you. My mother tells me that, but sometimes I just think she's being nice. And so from there on out, I said, Pastor Gillison, what do you want? Well, how can I be helpful? How can we? And he said, I just want to meet with you on a monthly basis. And so that's when we created the Better Together group. And it was about 20 pastors that I started meeting with on a monthly basis from the east side of Buffalo, the west side of Buffalo, and I call them the Catholics in the middle, that we just started meeting and talking and had an open dialogue. And then that turned into Pastor Gillison saying, you know, now that we're beginning to trust you, let's try to take on education reform in the community. And I said, look, I don't know that. I can't do that. But what do you need? And he said, well, we've never approached elected officials as one voice, where we brought together the business community and the faith-based community and others. So let's start doing that. And that led into Better Together in this urban think tank being seen as this voice. And we just had a meeting last week that we are asked to start to build an institute at the University of Buffalo that would focus on education reform and really give the tools and the resources to the people in the community to have that voice and those data points to start to push for education reform. Because at the end of the day, communities, innovation districts, whatever it is, if you don't figure out how to have a strong education system, you're always going to struggle. But Pastor Gillison was an amazing man. He became a great friend, and his son Dwayne, who's taking on the church, will be continuing to build that relationship with him. This is one that I put up that is a little, everything's not perfect. And that's the other part of the book, is that we hope gets out there, is you're definitely not going to be perfect, and you're going to make mistakes, and you need to hear from people. And Pastor Chapman, I met him in probably around 2004. He became the new pastor of this one church, been around for just about, I would say, close to 100 years. And he was the third pastor at the church. And he wanted to help to start to redevelop the surrounding neighborhood. He had property just adjacent to us. And I'd meet with him on a regular basis. And we started talking about how he could help us with projects, and we could help them with projects. And so he started redeveloping the neighborhood, building that out. But why I have Robert Wood Johnson on there is one of our first major grants we did, and it ties into the whole sustainability thing. And honestly, I had no idea what I was doing then. And it was a grant to go from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. There were just about 1,000 applicants, and it was for a program called Active Living by Design. And ours was to say, how do we tie community and infrastructure development into art and active living? And everybody else was doing kind of rails to trails projects. And we ended up becoming a finalist, and we had to go for an interview at Johns Hopkins. And Pastor Chapman didn't like to travel. And I said, hey, will you do me this favor and just come with me on this? This could be a big thing for the community. Anyways, that ended up leading into, we went down there. We ended up getting this. They gave it to 25 communities out of the 1,000 applicants. We ended up getting it. And when they had their interview with us to final, hey, you got the award, they said, we do have to tell you something kind of funny. We didn't believe your relationship was real with the pastor. We thought you were just making this up. And so once you walked into that meeting in Baltimore, you got it when the pastor was sitting there with you. You said, you guys, you were going to get the award anyways. And so we got it. But I do have to highlight one thing that came out of this. So we started to get a bunch of grants from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that our entity didn't do anything with, but we leveraged it in partnership with the university. And I want to take one, I can't remember what page it is in the book, but I think it's really important. because it is about a table of trust. It is about not being top down, but building with the community, not necessarily thinking about how we're going to make communities better. You have to do it with the community. And there's a lady by the name of Samina Raja, and Samina was, she is a professor at the university, has a huge food lab. And Samina said one of the biggest issues that she sees in building out innovation districts or building communities is that we always jump to, we've got to go build a table. And instead of building a table, what you need to do is open up your eyes and find out what other tables exist and how can we get ourselves invited to them. And I think that is one of the most important lessons that Samina taught me over the years, to start to say, okay, we can do things better by working with others and helping elevate others, because that will in the end help us out. I'm going to start flying through these next ones. Money matters, right? And early on, we had a local foundation, a gentleman by the name of Erky Kelborn was the chair, and their CEO was Tom Baker. Met with them and they said, look, we're going to invest a lot of money in what you guys are doing, but only if the institutions start to work together and it ties in the community. New York State came along, the federal government came along, and people started to see, I said we've done $1.4 billion worth of projects, but that was because everybody started doing it as a collective and started thinking of it that way. Leveraging infrastructure, this just highlights it on the federal side. I remember after we raised about, I think it was around $14 million at the time. If you guys remember them, some people called it pork, some people called them earmarks, whatever they were in the day. And we raised $14 million to upgrade the infrastructure on the campus. And I remember we were with Hillary Clinton's office and she said, what do you guys want next? And we said, well, we actually want money for the redevelopment of the surrounding neighborhoods and their infrastructure, because if we just build an isolated island that's our medical campus, that's not the full win for the community. And we ended up raising more money for it. But it was that look of learning, how can we leverage our access to get for others. National Grid. National Grid's been a great partner. I think in every community, there are utilities that want to do good. And what happened was one of the leaders of National Grid came to me and said, can we turn your campus into a living lab for energy? And I was naive. I didn't really know what I was, again, I guess maybe that's a theme. I didn't know what I was doing. And I said, sure. So we started trying things out, like streetlights that were off the grid. Back in 2012, we installed 21 charging stations. And to put that into context, after we finished installing them, the New York Times had a front page article of how Manhattan was planning to put in 50 charging stations throughout all of Manhattan. So we were early in on that. We put in a bioswale to look at the sewer systems and work with the sewer authority in Buffalo. Our team developed car share and jump bike, which was honestly one of my biggest mistakes. I don't know if I put that in the book because maybe that was when I really made a big mistake on it. Jump bike was an individual who created a bike share program, the one in New York City, that City Bike. We couldn't afford it in Buffalo, and he came up with this new idea and put the brains in the bike. And we put, I think it was about $25,000 of seed money into him to just help him get going. But we bought the product and started testing it out as his first location. And anyways, fast forward, front page of the Wall Street Journal, he sold the company for $200 million. We didn't have a piece of it. And people still remind me in every finance committee meeting about that decision that I made. So I just say we help with those things. But National Grid was a partner. And this image that you have here is, we leverage that into saying to National Grid, as we go into this, well, this was earlier before everybody's like taking off with the renewable world and decarbonization. This was probably 10 years ago. We said, what about doing solar in the low-income neighborhood and sharing in the revenue upside of that, and being open book and trying this new model with the Public Service Commission. And I'm pretty sure NYSERDA, which is a great partner of ours on all of our energy and clean tech stuff, they invested in it. And so it was this whole neighborhood community solar project that, leveraged our relationship to get, something that is not affordable in low-income neighborhoods to build that new model. And that led to this other group. And full disclosure, I'm actually on the board of Viridian right now. But Viridian, it all started by an individual who was watching all this clean tech stuff that we were doing. And he asked me what I was doing. And I said, back to the theme, I guess, I don't know, but we're going to try this. And what ended up happening was he created a green excavator. And that green excavator then led into what is actually installed right now in the first in the United States is a 600 kW installation of battery packs inside of a building. And it was for one of our research institutions who bought a microscope and couldn't get the microscope because the building load couldn't handle it. So they would have had to upgrade the utility. But by using battery packs to manage the building, it's managing the flexibility and helping build for the future. It's fully certified, has the fire department behind it. But the key reason for this slide here is through all our learnings and everything that we've seen is how do you include the community? How do you engage the community? And one of the things that that Viridian did was we, as a company, are investing $500,000 with a bank and a couple foundations to build a staffing agency that is actually run, and the nonprofit board is actually made up of people in the community. Those individuals are going to be a part of the company, and it's trying a new model of workforce to figure out how can you build a sustainable staffing agency that's owned by the community, driven by the community, and move forward from that standpoint. And that's why we highlighted this from that community model. Community Solutions and Roseanne Haggerty. If you don't know Roseanne and you don't know Community Solutions, I just put this slide in here because she's a great person and doing some really awesome stuff. She was a MacArthur genius, and I guess she became a Martha, where they give out their $1 million. But when you look up Roseanne, she's what I would call a MacArthur super genius now because they gave her $100 million to start figuring out how to continue her stopping of homelessness, especially for vets and others. I talked earlier, and I just don't want to forget these last few slides. Health and well-being was a major component of what we're doing. Policy, systems, environments. Our team is engaged with the community to work on that. It's critical that, and it's a growing aspect. We've got a big conference coming up in the middle of October that is Food is Medicine. What we're starting to do is connect the community with the healthcare systems and start to think about this differently. It's the second annual one. We've got a national group coming together, and hopefully you can all join that conversation. Kyrie Stevens on the left, D-Jack, Derek Jackson on the right. This is the phrase that I have there, integrating networks, and that's Kyrie's phrase. And what Kyrie said to me was, as we got to know each other and work together, he said, if we can take the network of people that Matt, and take the network of people that he knows, and we can start to integrate them and put them in rooms together and get them working and supporting one another, because they're each saying they want to get to know the other groups. How do we start to do that? And so Kyrie has been a huge leader in that. And I think every community and innovation district should do that. And Derek, just a great person who both Derek and Kyrie, we kind of look at each other and have a two-way mentoring. They're mentoring me, I'm mentoring them. I probably should have started with this because this is the most impactful thing that any innovation district can do. On the left-hand side, I have IC Success. Our IC Success was a program that we tried to start up after I walked through that building and saw a bunch of people that looked like me, but didn't see the representation of our community. And it was okay. But during the pandemic, I got asked by a great friend of the campus, a Buffalonian. She was Obama's chief technology officer. Her name's Meagan Smith. And she asked me to sit on this call that Schumer put together that brought 10 leaders across the country. And what they were looking at was when stimulus money got out, making sure that it got to underrepresented communities. And I didn't bring a lot to the table, but on that call was E for All. And that program, we founded one in Buffalo. It was founded by a gentleman by the name of Desh Deshpande. If you look up Desh Deshpande, he's been a very, very successful business person, but most importantly, he's a great human being who is focused on not just giving money to people and walking away and saying, hey, I did my thing. It's how do I help people learn? How do I help people learn and get the resources to be successful? And he's built this program in Buffalo in the United States. I am going to be a strong proponent that I think the federal government should be funding E4Alls and E4Evers in every single community, because it's a program that touches the community, is with the community. And we've had 2 cohorts. What it does is it supports 30 minority and women-owned businesses, gives them 3 mentors, a little bit of seed money and programming. And the constant theme that's come out of the 2 cohorts is that by doing this, it's basically feeling like they can be a part of the ecosystem and more importantly, be a part of a family to deliver stuff. And lastly, this slide is, I think, something that we should all be focused on and looking at. And this is, to me, you've probably all seen it and you probably know all of this better than I do, because this is the space you live in every day. I try to, but you are the experts in this. And the United Nations Sustainability Goals, we're tackling 8 to 10 of these. We're not tackling all of them. And I think if you pull together all the innovation districts that are out there, all the anchor institutions that are out there, all the people that are here at this Association of University Research Park, and you start to say, look, these are sustainability goals that are about making life better for everybody. And if we can all do this, we can all make our part to move forward. And lastly, me again, you know, a lot of people have asked me the question, how do you go from SNL to the BNMC? And at the core of this, it's about bringing people together. And, you know, SNL has been around for, I can't remember if it's 50 or 60 years right now, and communities are around forever. And the only way to make them truly great, and what I learned at SNL, was that when you bring great people and great minds together, great stuff can happen. So thank you. I hope you enjoy the book. If you would like me to come give a talk, lecture, meet with anybody, love to have the conversation so I can learn more. Thank you.
Matt, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I think one of the things that I really love about this talk, but also the book, is it's storytelling. And it's telling, like, not the high level of like bullet points of, we invested this much, we did this much. It's really getting into the nuances of where things happen. And I think in these anchor and innovation districts, anchor institutions and innovation districts, that's the reality. If you're doing this work, it's messy and it's complicated, and your storytelling really showcases that. As a reminder to the audience in the call, please put your Q&A, whatever questions you have, into the Q&A feature, and I will start reading those to Matt. I have a few questions of my own, but I'd really love to feature your questions. So I will start with one, though. So Matt, I do work in researching anchor institutions, and particularly university anchors and sort of their revitalization strategies, what they do. And I think one of the things that I get asked frequently, or I hear from anchor institutions, is like, why do you do this? Why do you do what you do? And what's the obligation of the anchor institution or the innovation district to the community? But how do you sell that even? Like, not just like you're selling the community on like, hey, we're here and we want to be a partner, but also how do you sell it to the innovation district and the leaders and the anchor institution, their leaders, that they should be in this space?
Yeah, you know, I think it's, you know, one of the things, I was on a panel earlier today about sustainability here. And, you know, I think it was a lot more difficult to sell it years ago to get people to buy into this. But if you look at the world right now, from sustainability to diversity, equity, inclusion, they're conversations that aren't forced conversations anymore. People, I think, you know, frankly, I think the next generation looks at the world very differently. And so the sell isn't as difficult, But, the one thing I often do is I go to people and I find good models that are out there, and I lead with that and say, here's why we should be doing this. Here's the change in the positive outcome that's a win-win for everybody if you take on this mission. From my perspective, at the end of the day, as I said, I'm an empty nester now, and I'm looking at the world maybe a little differently, that you just want to make it a better place. And that's so cliche, but the reality is anchors, I've learned so much, the leverage and the impact that anchors and innovation districts can have if they're intentional about making sure that everybody wins. That's what's most exciting to me and what I wake up enjoying every day.
Reminder to everyone else, pop your questions in the Q&A feature, please. I will sort of continue the conversation while I wait for those to trickle in. So before Phoenix, I lived in Philadelphia, and I was at the University of Pennsylvania doing my PhD there, and Penn does a lot in this space, right? They've been this anchor institution that's invested in their neighborhood. That's also led to a lot of tension, the coining of the word gentrification as they, gentrify the neighborhood and the displacement. And this seems like a pretty common concern for a lot of anchor institutions, particularly when they're sort of are extending into the neighborhoods that are around them. How have you thought about this challenge of displacement and gentrification as you invest and make the community better, that it doesn't always benefit everyone, and you can't control the markets? How do you think about that, and what lessons have you learned?
So a couple of things. I can't remember if this lesson ended up making it in the book or not. Father Vincent Cook was the president of Canisius College, college in Buffalo. And when we met him, one of his first, he was actually, I think he was the second meeting after the guy who told us, good luck, it's never going to happen. Father Cook said, I love what you guys are talking about. It's a big vision. It's great stuff that's going to be good for the community, but you're going to run into resistance. And he said, when you run into that resistance, make sure that the door is always open. People can come and talk to you anytime, but move on and start doing the little things that you can do to incrementally make the community better. And so Father Cook's voice has always stuck in my mind when we run into that resistance. It's really something that, again, you have to be intentional, and you have to have everybody that you're working with be intentional about saying, I really do want to listen to people. This isn't fluff. And then the most important thing is, after you listen to people and, everybody's not going to agree on things, you have to make those decisions, move forward, and keep that open door.
I think one of the things that I've studied Duke University and what they've done. And one of the things that they did was got into a community where they didn't have a super great relationship and they weren't really well liked. And it seems like a lot of their introductory process was getting yelled at and sort of being okay with that and being fine with that, and then figuring out priorities as they unfolded neighborhood by neighborhood, and it sort of responding to those individual needs. Do you feel like now that you've been doing this for 20 years that the community it views you as an open door, that they're much more willing to knock and be like, hey, Matt, we've got this thing. How can we work with you?
Yeah, so I would say it's yes, absolutely. It took probably about 5 years to start to get people to trust us. And it wasn't just because they were on the board, it was because it had to be more than that person, because a lot of these communities are fractured and all this other stuff. And so the answer is yes, that I feel like people do reach out to us, but I come back to, it's interesting. I talked about Pastor Chapman in the book. I've got friction with him right now over a development that he's doing. And fundamentally, I ended up having to say, this is happening because we're not talking. So please, let's just get in a room and talk about this. And they brought in a developer from out of town who was just trying to run a development through, and our whole process is everybody get in the room. And so you're going to have those mistakes, I guess, but on the whole, I come back to, as long as you know your planning process, your door is open, you're including everybody that you can possibly think of, just keep moving forward. I guess that's what City Forward is, as long as you're doing that inclusive. If you're just jamming things through, that's not going to fly anymore. And what I love about this next generation is they don't let that stuff happen. And I think the more, it's not about just being an activist, but it's being I don't know, we should come up with some really cool word for it, but it's like having your voice heard and moving stuff together forward. Because I've seen far too many times when it gets to activist, it just stops a project. And it's like this project that he's trying to do, I'm like, look, I'm not trying to stop. I want to have a community conversation about it. That's it. And so I think more of that has to happen.
Yeah, that seems to be a theme. I mean, it's a theme in lots of things right now across the US, but for planning, absolutely. There's, planning projects all the time. You get people coming forward that just want to stop something and don't necessarily want to go to the root of, okay, what's the real problem here, and work forward. To the audience, you will notice that in the chat feature on the side, Lauren has put in where you can buy Matt's book. And specifically, that's a link to the beloved local bookstore Changing Hands here in the Phoenix area. But if anyone has questions, oh, good. Okay. So you can get questions from someone else other than me.
Okay.
So can you talk about the structural choices of the Innovation District as compared to community land trust, et cetera, and competing interests? Are you using multiple structural tools to sort of think through those things?
Okay, so there's a bunch of questions there and I'm going to try to answer them. So the community land trust, they actually started one in the surrounding neighborhood that we supported. So we helped, we didn't drive it, we didn't lead it, but we were supportive of them getting one going. On the campus, we are not using like a lot of tools. Like we actually have somebody coming in to help us start rethinking about this, because it's kind of this voluntary, loose boundary thing that we haven't used any, bids or TIFs or any of that stuff to do the development that we're doing on the campus. But we're to the point now that we've got the bid component of what we're doing, and we've got this innovation arm. We're almost becoming two different entities that are working together. So all those tools that are out there, that's actually the type of stuff when I'm at these meetings, I like ask people, so how are you doing this? And that's my other big thing is I keep asking questions. Like, even though I've been at this for 20 years and, I've learned a lot, I'm still learning. And I guess the other big thing that I think, it's not answering the person's question, but I think as the world is changing, especially around sustainability, we really need to think about new tools, new processes, new legislation, because the technologies are moving so quickly that I think it's going to have impact. I think it can be for the good, but if not done correctly, it could be for not so good. So,
do you have any thoughts on how you navigate these competing interests, particularly in these areas of housing and, what the community land trust wants to do versus some of your growth that you want to do?
Yeah, so we have basically said we are, from our perspective is we are not growing outside of the existing footprint that we have. We want to support the community that's going on right now, community development, whether it's in the surrounding neighborhoods or within a mile or near rails. One of the other really important thing that I forgot to mention was Jamie on our team has spearheaded 2 recently received $10 million each grants that's focused on transportation of the future for accessibility, for people with disabilities, for people in underrepresented communities who need access to get to the campus. Our goal is to hope that near transit, we will support developments that are going on there to tie back in from a workforce standpoint. So yeah, we have basically, our answer is we are not growing outside of the existing footprint that we have. It's that simple. And it's not that easy for other people. I get that. And yeah, I see it happening in a lot of places right now. So.
Great, thanks. We're starting to get a bit of momentum from the audience on questions, so keep them coming. So question number 2. In your book, you mentioned Cleveland's IC. Do you collaborate with them? Have you thought of how you might extend the BNMC efforts to Rochester, Olean, Jamestown, like others, Erie, Pennsylvania? So sort of beyond where you are to sort of replicate and grow?
We talk to a lot of places. Like I actually have a call tomorrow with the head of they're trying to get they're building out the new innovation district in Arizona. Erie, Pennsylvania, we've talked to them regularly. They're actually setting up an E for All and an E Forever program that I had talked about. I don't really, what we want to do is go in and help people. So Curia's focused on building out a business that's focusing on culture in innovation districts and how you can build them in a diverse, inclusive way. Beth is leading an initiative with the health and well-being team focused on how do we build this out. So wellness and well-being is really important. And I think I talked about it earlier, but in these innovation districts, and I keep talking about the next generation, but mental health is critical. And you need to make sure that as a community leader, you're making mental health a priority. And I know I bounced from the question, but the reality is we're out there trying to help and consult for companies that want to learn about this stuff and doing that. And other than that, we're still learning from people.
Great. All right. So question number 3. And this gets into a little bit of the nitty-grittiness of development for you. Did you have to work with the city to alter the land use and zoning to achieve your developments? And what does that process look like for you?
So limited, and that's actually a great question. And that's a little bit of what the run-in is with the Reverend right now is instead of having a community process, it got a little fast forward by a developer. And we're just saying, no, it's a process. And so as we started doing all the development, what we do is we bring in anybody on the development. We'd bring in, whether it's private sector development or one of the institutions development, we'd have a whole network within the community. And it was a collective, like we did a collective EIS and, the nitty gritty part of it. That's where Jamie on our team is awesome. And he knows all the details on that. So we've had little tweaks to zoning and all of that, but on the whole, it's been okay because it's all about the process. It's, as the coach of the Buffalo Bills says these days, he said it 5 years ago. And if you're watching him these days, he says, trust the process. That's what we tend to do on the campus. And that's all we want to do is have a open, transparent conversation and process.
Has the city been a major player in your process, a major stakeholder in your conversations?
So early on, they were huge because they had to be. Lately, not so much, but the mayor and I were just meeting the other day talking about this stuff, and he's in his 5th term, and I think he's looking at the world in a way to start to say, how can he utilize some of the tools and the resources that our development and our partners have done to start to grow an inclusive environment. It comes down to access, and that's the biggest thing I've learned. The E for All program, just one quick note, our first cohort that we did, we had 26 applicants for 15 slots. The second one that we did, we had 87 applicants for the 15 spots. And you're just seeing that there's a real need out there and word of mouth for this. And, it's just amazing people who just need to have the same opportunities that, I've been granted and others in our circumstance have been granted.
Absolutely. So I've got one question left in the queue, and I think that's probably what we'll have time for. But so the last question goes back to your mention of the transportation grants. So are these grants directed to the Innovation District to manage and implement, or is it the Transportation Authority that is managing that?
So again, hold on, I can give you this exact answer. Jamie just sent it to me. So there are 2 different partnerships. One is with LISC, our local LISC organization. I'm gonna look at this. LISC and local, like the local bike club, shared mobility, our Go Bike team. That's the partnership, but LISC was kind of the lead, I'll call it principal investigator. And then on the other one, it was really the NFTA, which is the Transit Authority, and the City of Buffalo. So when you ask a question about that, the city is all over these two programs, and the mayor's committed to implementing the infrastructure. He's put dollars aside to start to do this and make that happen. So I'm really, it's each one was $10 million over 5 years. So we're going to be spending $2 million a year to start to do this. I think the city will probably put some more money in. The state and the feds are really looking at this as a model, and hopefully we can replicate that in other cities.
Well, fabulous. Matt, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, all of the things you've learned in your years in this position and are still learning, also for sharing the things that have not gone well, because I think there's so much to gain from that too. Thank you to the audience for attending.